Greetings! I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and it's time for a model railway update, because I've finally made some progress beyond painting the track, which I have, for now, finished. I think. I did cover the painting in a previous video. The final touches were some dry brushing with a couple of brownie colours onto the sleepers. This was both to hide where I'd scraped paint off while cleaning the railheads when brush painting the sides of the rails, and just to make the colours a bit more how I wanted them. That makes sense, right? I also applied a dark wash to the rails along the front of the layout, but only along the front, partly because I'm lazy, but mostly because I couldn't decide if I liked the darker look more than the lighter look. It's not all that different, and I figured it probably wouldn't hurt anything if the rails looked a bit different when viewed from either side, as long as they're reasonably consistent for either viewing angle. Anyway, the tracks are painted, so now I can finally start working on some scenery. To help with that kind of thing, I purchased a 3D printer, and I am still learning with that, but here's a couple of tunnels I found and printed up. I did paint some tunnel portals a while ago, but I would like some variety, so I'll use a couple of these too. The cool thing is that you can experiment without spending a ton of cash, which now that I say it, I guess is kind of obvious. I've also made the very first 3D design of my own. This is a sign for the building that will conceal my point switches. These are obviously quite simple, and could probably do with a bit of refinement, but it is really satisfying to be able to just think something up and print it out. A while ago I bought some XPS foam sheets, and I've finally started using them. Here's one of the bridge abutments I printed. This will be in its own video in the future. At the moment I'm using this piece, and around the other side, this wall section from Knock to figure out what size the chunk of foam in the middle should be. I can't imagine it will be too hard to remove foam, but I suspect it's a tiny bit easier to add more if I need it than to have to remove it. I'm sure nobody needs an in-depth tutorial on gluing bits of foam to wood. So here's an in-depth tutorial on how to glue foam to wood. Ha ha, just kidding. I use the straight edges of the foam boards for the outer edges, like here where the two halves of the layout meet. I'm cutting the part to size with a cheap knife here. I do plan to get a hot wire foam cutting thing, but at this point I don't need to cut anything super neatly or precisely, so the knife will do. I'm sure you could spend a bunch of time perfectly measuring everything out and making perfect neat cuts.
That doesn't seem like the Herbert Erpaderp way.
It sure doesn't. However, even Herbert Erpaderp knows that test fitting is important. I used a large piece of rolling stock, in this case a collet coach, to make sure everything will fit, and I discovered that this tunnel portal is too narrow, which would definitely be annoying if it was something I bought. Fortunately, I can just rescale it a bit and print it again, or just use a different portal. Also, as a tiny rolling stock update, I picked up a couple of the Dapol collets in maroon to go with my blood and custard ones. Now my train can be mismatched. Hooray! Here's how I plan on disguising the gap at the front of the layout. I printed some bridge abutments. I even figured out how to digitally split them to both make the bridge a bit wider and so that I wouldn't have to physically cut anything. There is still obviously quite a bit of work to do here, and as I said before, this is going to be its own video someday. The girder bridge is going to be cut in half because I only really want the sides. This is going to be a road bridge. I felt like it would not only be a good way to hide the gap in the rails, which at the front do look kind of unpleasant when you get close, but also, if anything happens to derail on the gap, it might, hopefully, prevent trains from running express to Floor Junction. I haven't totally figured out how I want all of the scenery, and this little spot is somewhere that I'm not sure about, so I've left the gap empty for now, but I might fill it in. Most of the layout is going to be a fairly built-up town, and I think maybe I want a road coming through here, across the main line and into the central area, so it looks like the industries there have road access. Maybe a road bridge across the top of the gap too. There's a lot to think about, and that is actually part of the fun, or at least I think it is anyway. What I do know is that I want the curves at the end of the layout to be tunnels, so I painted those black with some cheap craft paint. At this point I haven't covered the tunnel areas yet, because I'm still going to need to have access for ballasting. Can't just have the ballast stopping at the tunnel portal now, can we? I'm also pretty sure I want these walls all along the back of the layout here. The plan is to eventually have a row of houses and shops above them. I've only really got a rough idea of where I want everything else. There's going to be a town in the centre on top of where the foam is, with the main road down the centre where the two halves of the layout join. The lower area where it's still plywood is going to have more industry. That's why the foam I've put on doesn't have any gentle sloping. There won't really be any hills. Well, maybe some hills, but there is going to be a lot of retaining walls and things like that around the place. Thankfully, I've now got a 3D printer, so adding walls and things like that is going to be significantly cheaper. In this shot, you can see there's a center pillar for the bridge, and the tunnel areas have been painted. Not super neatly, but enough that once they're enclosed, it should be nice and dark. I've also put a different tunnel portal with a bit of wall that links into it on the right side of the layout, and I think that one fits there pretty nicely, though of course that could very well change. So that's it. It's not massive progress, but after painting rails for so long it feels like a really big step. I'd really like to start on ballasting, and I did buy some ballast, but I think it's probably a bit more sensible to figure out signals, or at least the positioning of the signals. I imagine there would be some interaction between the two, and it's probably a bit harder to remove chunks of ballast to install a signal than the other way around. I only have a very basic knowledge of signals and how they work and how they would be positioned. If anybody has any good links to information on signal positioning, in particular on the Great Western in the 1930s and 40s, that would be fantastic. Let me know in the comments below. It's not my intention to be painstakingly hyper-realistic or anything like that, but I would like for things to look convincing. If you have any questions or comments, those can go in the comments section too. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links are in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.